The story erupts with a flash of light, the screen suddenly aglow. A cursor, reminiscent of a vintage computer interface, hovers above what looks like a battlefield, a stark reminder that despite the chaos unfolding, this is all a game. Yet, the intensity of the battle between two warring factions, one worshipping the god Nebula, the other Hegemonia, feels far from mere simulation. Both sides fight with brutal ferocity, wielding strategies and powers as though the gods themselves are pushing pieces on a cosmic chessboard. But unlike chess, the moves here are unpredictable, devastating, capable of launching world-ending events. Nebula's player, relentless, approves a nuclear strike, launching warheads at Hegemonia's forces. But Hegemonia's player remains unshaken, as faith-imbued defense towers intercept the missiles. The explosion is spectacular, but not quite enough. Amid the chaos, one missile slips through, hurtling toward Hegemonia's capital. Inside the palace, orc followers pray desperately to their god for salvation. And in this strange world, their prayers do not fall on deaf ears. A spirit, born from their faith, materializes to block the missile. But Nebula anticipated this. He knows Hegemonia's strategy well, the so-called Holy Oak approach, built on a relentless population of orc worshippers. The opponent's faith system is powerful, quick to mass resources and unleash countermeasures. Yet, while Hegemonia's defenses control the skies, Nebula has weapons beyond them. He deploys ancient military satellites, armed with godly rods. Hegemonia's mockery of Nebula's earlier failure turns to dread as they realize what's coming. Despite Hegemonia's desperate attempts to block the attack, the rods plunge toward the Earth, accelerated to incredible speeds. When they strike, the destruction is absolute, obliterating the Emperor's palace and collapsing the underground temple. Without their leader and center of faith, Hegemonia's army crumbles. Victory is Nebula's. Triumphant, Nebula issues the customary GG, but Hegemonia refuses to accept defeat, demanding a rematch. She vows this loss is just the beginning of her comeback. Nebula, however, is unimpressed, and despite her certainty, he declines. Yet, as Nebula prepares to log off, a message unexpectedly pops onto his screen. It's not a victory screen, but a congratulations for completing every achievement in the game. The odd timing and content intrigue him. How could this message appear now, in such a popular game? As he delves deeper into the notification, he discovers the game has only been an early access beta. The official release is on the horizon, and as the top-ranked player, Nebula is invited to test the final version early. Intrigued, he accepts the invitation. In a flash, he's pulled into a sea of binary code, only to emerge into a vast, silent universe. Stars glitter all around, and in the midst of them stands Nebula's game avatar. It's breathtaking and eerily real. He rises, realizing he's somehow become the character he once controlled. Before he can comprehend this strange new reality, a figure approaches, a woman in flowing robes who calls him by his real name, Sung-won. She introduces herself as Alden, leaving him with more questions than answers. Before Sung-won can respond, shadows begin to creep in, hinting that this journey has only just begun. A group of lizardmen continued to wander across the barren land, exhaustion clearly etched on their faces. Fortunately for them, they happened to stumble upon an injured gazelle on their path. Without hesitation, they attacked the animal, and having gone so long without tasting meat, they devoured it like wild men, savoring every bite. The injured and elderly among them merely sat at the side, watching as the gazelle was reduced to nothing but bones. However, the healthier lizardmen planned to consume even these bones, as the marrow within was just as delectable. Before they could finish, one of them, Yael, snatched the bones away and reminded the others that they had eaten enough, suggesting they leave the remains for those unable to hunt. Despite it being mere bones, the wounded and elderly were grateful and did not blame the others. They fully understood the situation they were in, but unlike the weak, the healthy ones questioned Yael's decision. They didn't care if they shared the scraps with the old or the young, but Rak, the wounded lizardman, was clearly on death's door. His wound had already festered. It was a miracle he was still alive at all. They couldn't fathom how he had kept pace with the group without falling behind. Still, despite this, Yael's conviction remained unchanged. It wasn't just out of sympathy. Rak had been the one to face the saber-toothed tiger when the others had turned their backs and fled. Thanks to Rak, No one else in the group was hurt, and if it weren't for him, many would have perished or been severely wounded. In the worst-case scenario, the whole group could have been annihilated. The others understood this and appreciated Rakrak's bravery, but the reality remained. He was dying, and there wasn't enough food to go around. Yael lashed out at them, calling them ungrateful children of the snowstorm, but they shrugged off his outburst, more concerned with practical reasoning. Despite the arguments, they ultimately followed Yael's lead, allowing Rakrak to remain with the group. As the others huddled together for warmth, Rakrak lay alone in a corner, his injury making it difficult for him to sleep comfortably. Yet this allowed him to quickly notice a blue butterfly fluttering above. Curiously watching it, he saw it lead him to the peak of a hill bathed in a strange, glowing light. With nothing else to do, Rakrak stood and followed the mysterious light. Watching him walk away, the others assumed he had finally left the group, but no one stopped him. It was his choice. They simply watched to see what he would do next. Meanwhile, Rakrak clung to the last bit of hope in his bleak life, wondering whether this was all just a mad illusion. The fact that he was the only one who saw the light suggested it might be. Still, as he climbed the hill, he marveled at what he found, a tower of beetles, enough to feed the entire group. A system message appeared before Nebula, informing him that the lizardmen considered this a miracle. Relieved, Nebula observed as the lizardmen enjoyed their bounty. His next task was to make them aware that this miracle was his doing and reveal his divine name. To his surprise, Rakrak proclaimed the miracle himself, which made sense. Those with a strong will often took matters into their own hands. With the beetles in hand, they acknowledged Nebula as their god, but instead of naming him after the butterfly that guided them, they called him the nameless beetle god. Nebula found this amusing. He had expected them to name him after the butterfly, but a beetle god was acceptable. He understood that no one started with a grand name, so he let it go. Watching them, Nebula couldn't help but smile, realizing that Rakrak would play an important role for him, and the same was true for Rakrak. The next day, Rakrak saw the butterfly again and considered following it once more. The other lizardmen were pleased to see him watching the butterfly, as it signaled they would soon be full again. But this time, Rakrak hesitated. They owed a great debt to the beetles, and with winter approaching, the beetles would soon come from the cold north. Heading in that direction would surely lead them to freeze to death. Rakrak's logic quickly swayed the others away from feasting on beetles and prompted them to head in a different direction. Though this seemed like a logical solution, Rakrak felt they were making a mistake. There was nothing in the other direction either, though he admitted he had no clue what the fantasy he followed held for them. Meanwhile, Nebula watched it all, realizing that the lizardmen were losing faith. He understood that this was just the beginning and that their distrust was natural. There wasn't much he could do for now, but if he had to choose, he preferred a leader who was logical over one blindly led by faith. However, as long as Rakrak continued to believe in him, Nebula was confident he could lead Rakrak toward a future beyond his wildest dreams. Just as Nebula hoped, the tribe followed Rakrak's path, eventually ascending a small hill overlooking the wilderness. As they climbed, their eyes widened in disbelief at what lay before them. Rakrak turned to face them, announcing that the nameless beetle god had once again bestowed a miracle upon them. He had led them to a sacred place, surrounded by thick bushes and trees, encircling a vast spring from which small waterfalls and streams flowed. The lizardmen rejoiced with all their might, celebrating this glimmer of hope for survival, thanks to Rakrak's decision. At the same time, Nebula's divinity level increased to level 2, and his small area also rose to level 2. With this, the blessings of Book's skill became available, a crucial ability in the Lost World game. This skill allowed players to grant special abilities to their followers, which evolved their small area as it leveled up. This blessing would allow the followers to evolve, changing their appearance, and these traits would be passed down to their descendants. Nebula had a feeling that Rakrak knew exactly what he wanted, so Nebula decided to bless Rakrak, making him a priest to deliver Nebula's will to the others. He showed that he need not worry too much, especially because God watches over those approved by the Rakrak, for he too believed in God more than anyone. Yet, God's will often felt difficult to understand for those who followed, and if the leader failed to grasp its meaning, a time would come when they would betray God's will, a thought that terrified him. For this reason, he pondered deeply the vision he had been shown, seeking its meaning. To his surprise, he didn't have to wonder for long, for a massive group appeared on the horizon. With this, they now understood why the altar had trembled. It had been a warning of the enemy's arrival. As they watched closely, there was no doubt that these were the very people who had once exiled them. The leader among them bore blue scales, just as they had before, and above all, the enormous beast, tamed only by that leader, was there, confirming their suspicions. Judging by their numbers, it seemed as though the entire tribe had arrived. This could only mean that their homeland, a swamp of green-skinned creatures, had been utterly destroyed. This troubled the Rak deeply, and the only explanation Zhao could fathom was that the massive beast's upkeep had drained their resources much faster than expected. However, they believed their own sanctuary, hidden in terrain unseen until scaled, was safe from discovery. It was likely the enemy would pass it by without noticing. But things did not unfold as they had hoped. The patrol, led by Ur, revealed themselves, boldly shouting to the approaching tribe to halt their steps. This was the sacred ground of the unnamed beetle's avatar, and they were not to set foot any further. Instead of retreating, this only sparked curiosity in their foes. Even Rak couldn't believe their naivety. But he told Yael not to worry, for this might also be a plan set by God, a notion that left Yael puzzled. He asked what Rak meant, to which Rak explained his belief that God had deliberately orchestrated this situation. This led Yael to think that it was a test from God. But Rak clarified it was not a test, rather, it might be a mission. A mission to welcome and save those who were once part of their community. Even so, Yael remained uneasy, knowing full well that the leader of the other tribe had been ruthlessly cruel. He would cast the weak into the wilderness without a second thought. Changing that leader's mind seemed utterly impossible. As they reflected on this, a blue butterfly once again appeared before Rak, a clear sign of God's will. With this, he realized how foolish it was for them to dare think beyond their limits, for they had no power to foresee the future. Speculating here would lead them nowhere. The only thing they could do now was face their foes head-on. Meanwhile, Nebula was pleased to see that Rak had truly understood his message. The Rak tribe and the Bluehide tribe needed to unite for the sake of population growth and technological advancement. However, what puzzled Nebula was Rak making this decision on his own. Nebula believed this was due to Rak's strong will, something Nebula considered a good trait for a leader. The only thing he hoped now was that Rak could develop even stronger conviction. If he could do that, Nebula would be able to control everything more efficiently and express his intentions more clearly. However, Nebula acknowledged that such development would take time and greater influence. For now, he focused on the imminent battle. As expected, the cunning leader of the blue-scaled lizardmen had decided to use his sly tongue to extract more information from the naive Rak warriors. With every sneer, Ur's group revealed more about their sanctuary, until the leader was confident he had bested them. But then, someone unexpected answered him with more confidence and conviction, Rak. He disclosed that their land was protected by an avatar. Rak's commanding presence exuded a leader's aura, causing the blue-scaled leader to withdraw his mocking tone and seriously ask what Rak meant by the avatar. Rak explained that this place was the domain of the unnamed beetle avatar. Yet, the blue leader scoffed at such beliefs, concluding that Rak was delusional, just like the rest of his tribe. Reverting to his arrogant tone, the blue leader taunted them once more, demanding that they leave. He assured them that if they fled now, no harm would come to them. His condescension was so palpable that it reached the very mountains, as if looking down on them from above. But Rak, to the blue leader's shock, simply shook his head, raising his spear toward him, showing that he was ready to fight. Stunned, the blue leader hesitated, and before he could respond, Rak turned to the others, those who followed the blue leader. He invited them to join the Rak tribe, promising that under God's protection, they would be cared for according to his will. This only made the blue leader burst into laughter, dismissing Rak's words as nonsense. It seemed there was no point in further discussion, for the blue leader viewed them all as fools. Rak simply said, "You do not know God. Now, look at this spear, it is sharp." The blue leader was indeed surprised, for the spear was sharp, but what worried him more was that Rak continued to speak nonsense. Infuriated, the blue leader decided to attack the foolish lizard before him. As the blue leader charged,
Rak prayed to his god for the courage and strength to defeat the enemy before him. Yet, to his disappointment, God answered, "Do you think